It's time to answer some more questions about the Rio Grande Plan. The Rio Grande Plan is a vision for better transit in downtown Salt Lake City, redevelopment of industrial areas and wasted space adjacent to our freeway, and reunification of the historically divided east and west sides of our city. The centerpiece is a 1-mile-long subgrade train box, which would reroute all trains through the city along the historic rail corridor of 500 West. This box would pass by the Rio Grande Depot, making it the new rail hub for our city instead of this current Salt Lake Central station. It would also close 4.5 at-grade crossings, increasing public safety and the reliability of transit service. Finally, it would free up over 50 acres of land currently covered in rail yards and industrial space, allowing that land to be redeveloped. The income generated by this land will, in turn, pay for the cost of construction, making the Rio Grande Plan a self-funding project in the long run. For more information, please visit our website at riograndeplanssaltlakecity.org or watch some of my other videos on the subject. Okay, question 1. What precautions will be made for hazardous materials and railroad safety? At the time of this video's publishing, there has been a renewed interest by the public in rail safety, owing mostly to the unusual visibility and media coverage of a recent derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. This was an unfortunate and highly preventable environmental disaster, and I hope more is done to enforce existing safety rules, and to expand the use of line-side detectors. Each time a train crashes, more than just money is lost. The environment is damaged, people are displaced, and trust in the rail system diminishes. So, what can we do to prevent a similar disaster from happening inside the Rio Grande train box? The obvious answer is better detection. Line-side detectors can sense excess heat, noise, vibrations, etc., and inform the operating crew right away via radio if something is wrong. The train that derailed in Ohio also passed through a few detectors, but these were too few and far between to catch the fatal bearing failure. By placing detectors at a higher density leading up to the train box, it is unlikely that a freight train with a similar issue would enter the box in the first place. This is basically the same technique used at other constrained pieces of rail infrastructure, such as major tunnels or bridges. For cargo that is especially unwanted, there is also the possibility of a rail back door that avoids the Rio Grande train box and downtown entirely. This new route would be pieced together from existing and historic lines between 600 and 3200 West, linking Roper Yard with the inland port. In fact, such a line may be needed in the near future anyway in order to divert local rail traffic between these two rail centers away from the main lines and the downtown core. Number 2. What measures would be taken to address ventilation in the train box? Generally speaking, there are two ways of maintaining good ventilation: active and passive. Passive ventilation systems have no moving parts. The design is such that dirty air is not trapped within the enclosed space, and so gets replaced by fresh air without any special effort. The two train boxes often mentioned in relation to the Rio Grande Plan are the ReTrack project in Reno, Nevada, and the Alameda Corridor in Los Angeles. These two boxes are both passively ventilated, with the majority of each being open on top to allow air to circulate. There are exceptions, however, such as this area in Reno that has been covered to act as a community space, or this part of the Alameda Corridor where the opening on top has been reduced to just 10 feet wide. Our original proposal for the Rio Grande Plan follows this same pattern, and includes ventilation structures along the length of the box, placed in a raised median so as to be far away from pedestrians and residents. Active ventilation is when some sort of mechanical device is employed to clear the air artificially, basically fans. These are less preferable than the passive system due to the energy and maintenance costs, but sometimes there is no other viable option. These sorts of ventilation systems are extremely common and have been tried and tested in various locations around the world for resilience in all kinds of climates. So to summarize, I am hopeful that a passive ventilation system of open vents would be enough to reliably clear the air. However, if not, an active ventilation system of fans and blowers would be a relatively standard feature to install and would not be a barrier to implementing the Rio Grande Plan. Number 3. What features would you like to see in the restored Rio Grande Depot? When the Rio Grande Depot was first opened in 1910, it had all the latest amenities of the very best train stations across the country. But times change, and features such as a men's smoking room or a telegraph office just aren't the selling points they used to be. So what sort of 21st century features could we swap in? First, if you are a daily commuter, you probably don't need all that much. Ticketing will be handled by regular passes, or, at very worst, a ticket vending machine. Trains will come frequently enough that waiting areas and other convenience features will probably go unused. However, there are plenty of reasons to be hopeful that we will soon see the return of longer distance trains to places like Moab, Pocatello, Boise, southern Utah, and Las Vegas. I'll go over my thoughts on that subject in a different video series, after I finish my series on the history of the Rio Grande Depot, but here's a preview. In short, I believe that Salt Lake City can become the regional hub of a network of passenger rail lines, and if so, the Rio Grande Depot could use a few key features to make travel easier and bolster the image of Salt Lake City. These are, in no particular order: 1. The restaurant. Ever since the depot opened in 1910, a restaurant has always occupied the end of the northern arm, right up to the 2020 earthquake that closed the building to the public. I hope that when the seismic retrofits are finished in the coming years, that this space will once again open as a restaurant to hungry travelers. Number 2. A convenience store, selling snacks, prepackaged meals, reading material, and other items to improve the travel experience, such as is seen in major train stations and airports throughout the world. 3. Storage lockers. If a passenger has a layover in the city, it would be in the city's interest to provide a space for luggage storage so that these travelers could spend their time exploring the city, seeing the sights, and spending money at local businesses. 4. A lounge area for upgraded passengers. Current Amtrak passengers and sleeping cars are allowed access to lounges in major stations, such as in Chicago. These spaces are generally provided for passengers in business class or its equivalent, as passengers who pay a premium for upgraded tickets generally expect more for their ticket price. A good example is Brightline in Florida, who offers 2 tiers of service, and who begins the more comfortable travel experience from the moment passengers enter the station door. Such service is just one more reason to take the train, versus a plane or bus, or even a personal automobile. 5. Conference rooms, or other reservable event space. Being at the center of a transportation network means the Rio Grande Depot would be a very accessible location for business meetings, art shows, private gatherings, and many other kinds of events. Perhaps if the men's smoking room or women's retiring room are not converted into lounge space, one or both of these rooms could be so repurposed. 6. Playgrounds. Waiting for trains is a great time for kids to get their energy out before having to behave themselves for a few hours. Playgrounds at train stations, or even on board the trains themselves, is a growing trend worldwide. Utah famously has one of the youngest populations in the United States, so there is very little reason as to why this idea can't be successful here. I'm envisioning something akin to the play area at the City Creek Mall food court, or perhaps something more like the playland at a restaurant, with slides and tunnels and such. 7. A bicycle garage. I'm always extremely jealous of videos of bicycle parking in the Netherlands, usually at central stations, where cyclists can pay a small fee to keep their bicycles in secure areas while they travel by train. In so many cases, riding a bicycle to the train station is the fastest and easiest option, whereas bringing a bicycle on board the train itself isn't practical or needed, and this sort of bicycle storage facility bridges those needs. And lastly, number 8, a baggage check. Amtrak already allows baggage to be checked at Salt Lake City for its California Zephyr service, and it would be pretty great if other future services had this option as well. Additionally, I think it would also be in the city's interest to integrate the baggage check system at the Salt Lake City International Airport with the Rio Grande Depot, allowing passengers to arrive at the train station and to check their bags to their final destination airport, or for passengers arriving from the airport to retrieve their bags at the Rio Grande Depot instead of at the Salt Lake City Airport before boarding a bus or train to their final destination. Bags could travel between the depot and the airport on secured vans, or, in the future, autonomous shuttle vehicles able to deliver the bags directly to the security screening systems. In general, I think the Salt Lake City Department of Airports does an amazing job managing and updating their airport, and my dream would be to see that department grow to become the Department of Airports and Rail Stations, so that they could also take over management of the Rio Grande Depot as a sort of downtown terminal. Number 4. Once the railroad tracks are removed from the surface, what about the interstate freeways? Doesn't I-15 still pose a barrier between east and west? Well, yes and no. I'm riding now on 800 South under I-15, and honestly, it's not so bad. I don't have to slow down or stop for anything, and the bike lane, sidewalk, and traffic lanes continue at the same width as they would on a normal piece of road. So long as it remains well lit and well patrolled, it'd be very hard to consider this a barrier, at least on the same level as a railroad crossing. Now, obviously, being a physical barrier isn't the only reason not to want a freeway running through your neighborhood. It's loud, it's wide, it spreads pollution, and it draws distinct boundaries that are often used to divide social groups. But unfortunately, none of those problems would really be solved by moving a freeway underground. For example, look to Boston's Big Dig or Seattle's Alaskan Way to see that, even after a freeway has been moved below ground, the buildings don't go back in on top. This is because, unlike trains, which can use narrow tunnels without a problem, Freeways must have wide openings, with no columns between lanes to help support the weight of the massive buildings going up above. Passive ventilation does not work on freeways, so large, noisy fan buildings are often required to blow polluted air up to the surface. The result is that, when freeways do get buried, the most that can get built above them is usually just more roads, with perhaps some green or public space thrown in. That being the case, barring a complete closure of the freeway, bridges such as the 800 South Crossing are usually about as good as it gets. However, none of what I just said applies to interchanges, which are just as bad as the detractors say they are. This is the interchange at 4th South, and as you can see, it is extremely loud, confusing, and unpleasant. Cars only have one stoplight to wait for, but we pedestrians and cyclists have two, plus the two slip lanes that leave pedestrians at the mercy of distracted motorists. Cars come flying through here at freeway speeds, and the lights stay clear for the ramps longer than they do for the actual streets, just to be sure that the ramps don't back up with waiting cars. I could go on and on about the design choices on display here, but I don't think I need to. I don't think anyone has ever had a good experience down here. This interchange also makes the prospect of burying the freeway even more challenging. For comparison, the Rio Grande plan proposes a train box that is 1 mile long and 120 feet wide. I-15 is up to 3 times wider than that, and the underground portion would likely be twice as long. In that distance, there is currently about 3 miles worth of bridges spread out over a dozen structures, and all of that would need to be torn out and recreated underground. Finally, the Rio Grande plan promises to open up new land for redevelopment, which would in turn offset its construction costs. And, as discussed earlier, an underground I-15 wouldn't be able to provide any taxable revenue to the city. In short, burying the freeway would be a significantly bigger challenge than what we've proposed with the Rio Grande plan. I'm open to the possibility of such a project happening in the future, but for the time being, I think that such ambitions are a distraction from the more realistic Rio Grande plan. A more plausible project for the near future, assuming the success of the Rio Grande plan, would be closing the 4th South interchange. I hope we can all agree that having interchanges on 3 streets in a row is excessive. The current system of on-off ramps to 4th South could be consolidated with the 5th and 6th South ramps, which themselves could be shortened from their current tie-in at 5th West to either 6th or 7th West, depending on the direction. This would have the benefit of 1. Significantly improving the pedestrian experience on 4th South, which could become a surface-level street all the way out to the Jordan River, while also 2. Reducing the number of cars on 4th South, since it is rapidly becoming a major transit corridor. One of the main reasons the interchange wasn't built like this in the first place is that adding 2 more ramp lanes to the 5th and 6th South viaducts would have made them 6 lanes wide, which would be too wide to tie in with the existing street grid from above. However, with shortened ramps, this is no longer a problem, since, without the viaducts over the rail yards, the ramps would tie directly into the street grid from the side, without huge bridges coming down in the middle of the street. What's that you say? It was impossible before? Not with the Rio Grande plan, it isn't. One last side note, since I realize this has probably been a very disappointing answer. The freeway ramp at 9th South has been the subject of contention for many years, feeding traffic directly into downtown at the expense of the local neighborhood below. It was originally intended to be the south end of a high-capacity loop, with the north half tying in at 600 North, and let's all be glad for a moment that that didn't happen. Now, over half a century later, the 900 South viaducts have overstayed their welcome and ought to be rerouted somewhere else. My suggestion is that the ramps ought to be realigned onto 500 West, the same street as the Rio Grande train box. By linking these two projects together, the Rio Grande plan could be partially financed with abundant freeway money, vehicle traffic could be moved to the outside of the downtown core, and express buses from all across the valley on the freeway network could have direct access up to the Rio Grande Depot on 500 West via the new freeway ramps. It's a winning situation for everyone. Number 5. How would buses and TRAX fit into the redesign of the Rio Grande plan? One of the great things about Salt Lake Central Station is the plaza that connects the TRAX light rail and frontrunner commuter rail systems. It is about as easy a transfer as is possible with a flat station design, thanks mostly to the fact that it is the terminus for TRAX, which always uses the westernmost track. The only times you'll need to cross a railroad track is if you are catching a northbound frontrunner or if TRAX is running a strange service pattern. In pitching the Rio Grande plan, Kevin and I wanted to show that the same level of convenience is possible for the Rio Grande Depot. Our concept shows 2 TRAX platforms on the east side of the depot, both of them side platforms, meaning you won't need to cross any railroad tracks to get to them. Instead, it is the trains that cross in front of each other, here and here, to make sure that nobody needs to wander in front of the trains to reach their proper platforms. Northbound trains stop at the northern platform, while southbound trains stop at the southern platform, just to make it as easy as possible for passengers to find the trains they want. Of course, there are other ways to bring tracks to the depot as well, including this option to keep the line on 400 West, which is half a block or 450 feet away from the depot itself. It also utilizes the old railroad alignment between 9th and 13th South, which would presumably give trains priority in crossing 3rd West. This priority, as well as the elimination of 2 sharp corners, would certainly speed up TRAX operations, but my opinion is that, because the Rio Grande Depot would be the main hub of rail transit in the city, the sharp corners and potentially slower speeds are entirely justified, since it is bringing people right up to the doorstep of where they actually want to go, not just close enough. And, most importantly, if you turn this concept on its side, it becomes the shape of Utah. How cool is that? As for buses, there are several ideas. Cameron went to great lengths to model bus bays at the north and south ends of the Rio Grande train concourse, which would certainly be the most convenient option for passengers. However, at the time of this video's publishing, UTA is pushing forward with its own plans for a headquarters building at the Salt Lake Central Station site, which pretty well signals that their bus operations, at least, are going to stay where they are, since that is the site right next to the new UTA bus maintenance complex. It's also conveniently located next to I-15, which is ideal for intercity bus travel, especially if the HOV ramps from 4th South could be rerouted directly into the bus station as part of the closing of the 4th South interchange I proposed in the previous answer. I think it would be pretty great to have both a historic train station and a modern bus station, only a block away from each other, with city buses leaving the old Central Station and passing right by the Rio Grande Depot before heading further into downtown. In summary, there are multiple options, all of them with their pros and cons, and these decisions are nowhere close to being made yet. Number 6. Would Amtrak trains get their own track at the Rio Grande Depot, or would they stop on the UP main line? How would trains be fueled and serviced like they are now? Now that is a good question. Currently, Amtrak has its own tracks and platform at Salt Lake Central Station, as well as 2 access roads so that fuel trucks can refuel the tanks on the long-distance diesel locomotives. If everything is running on time, only the west track is used, as trains come through one at a time, but the capacity is there for the rare instance in which both trains pull into Salt Lake City at once. At times, other servicing is done as well, such as refueling the water reserves on the Superliner cars and restocking on food supplies. In fact, this is one of the largest servicing stops on the entire 2,438-mile route. Without it, Amtrak would not be able to run their service. In the Rio Grande plan, Cameron and I show only 2 tracks for both Amtrak and Union Pacific. Because these would both be mainline tracks, this platform would be closed off to passengers whenever a passenger train isn't present, similar to how Brightline manages passenger access to their platforms, which are built directly on the main line of the Florida East Coast Railway. Having platforms directly on the main line can be advantageous, since trains would be able to arrive and depart at full speed without the need to worry about switches and signal clearances. However, stopping for prolonged periods and blocking the main line, not to mention refueling in a below-grade and enclosed environment, is probably not going to get approved, and for good reason. The Rio Grande Depot tracks, as Cameron and I show them, are designed for very brief stops without servicing. So where will Amtrak long-distance trains be serviced and refueled? There are a few options, such as a new stop at Murray Central, since it is very centrally located on UTA's network, or a different new stop out by the airport, since the tracks go so close. But my recommendation would be to reroute the California Zephyr from the current route along former Western Pacific Tracks south of the lake to the former Southern Pacific Tracks across the lake in order to include a stop at Ogden. Ogden has been without Amtrak service since 1997, which is a shame since it also has a beautiful train station that ought to be used again. Exactly how that can be done will be the topic of a separate video, but for the most part, the facilities are all still there, including direct transit connections and all of downtown Ogden within easy walking distance. And the best part of it is, the route through Ogden wouldn't add any additional time to the Zephyr schedule, since the distance by rail from Salt Lake City to Elko is exactly the same distance, 125 miles, no matter which way you go, owing to the different routes needing to traverse different mountain ranges. And since Amtrak only passes through the Wasatch Front in the dead of night, when Frontrunner isn't running, stopping directly in Ogden would mean that passengers there would finally have more convenient access to rail travel again, adding to Amtrak's ridership. Well, that's a half a dozen more questions, and that's plenty for today. Please keep submitting your questions in the comments below or on our website at riograndeplan.saltlakecity.org. And also, if you'd like to support us, keep spreading the word about the Rio Grande Plan, including writing to your elected representatives. Even though Salt Lake City is about to embark on a formal feasibility study, a plan this big doesn't happen just because it is feasible. It will take an enormous show of support from citizens across the state to show that the people of Utah want better rail transit, beginning in downtown Salt Lake City at the Rio Grande Depot. So thank you for all you do to support and promote the Rio Grande Plan. Together, I sincerely believe that we have a very real possibility of success. I'm Christian Lenhart. Thank you for watching. And one last thing. No, we are not selling merch, but I have uploaded our logo to the website for you to download in case you want to make your own mugs or hats or shirts or stickers or yard signs or whatever. Go nuts, guys!